The screen is pitch black, echoing only with the rhythmic clank of iron shackles dragging across cold concrete. Suddenly, an aggressive electronic scream from a high-sensitivity metal detector shatters the silence. In a stark intake room within a remote European penitentiary, four armed guards surround Lucas. Shirtless and heavily muscled, he carries himself more like a king than a convict, his dark beard groomed to perfection despite the chaos. After 3 frantic searches yield nothing but skin and scars, Warden Crypson barks an order for a digital X-ray. The monitor flickers to life in a haunting blue glow, plunging the room into a stunned silence. Superimposed over Lucas's heart is a cluster of 7 dense, lead bullets. They aren't just lodged in his chest, they have become part of his anatomy. The prison doctor's hands tremble as he looks from the screen to the man. "How are you still standing?" he whispers. "Those should have killed you years ago." Lucas doesn't panic. His intense gaze locks onto the doctor's as he speaks in a low, gravelly baritone. "A heart that's been shattered 7 times doesn't have the luxury of stopping," he rasps. "I kept them there to remind me that in this world, even your blood can betray you. Please, don't forget to subscribe." The heavy iron door groaned as it slid open, exhaling the stale, metallic scent of 1,000 caged men. Lucas stepped into the main yard, his presence acting like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. The cacophony of shouting and clanking iron died down to a low, jagged murmur. He didn't look like the other inmates. While they wore their desperation like a second skin, Lucas wore his silence like armor. His dark green pants hung low on his powerful hips, and his shirtless torso, defined by hard, functional muscle and the faint, jagged scars of 7 near-fatal encounters, glowed under the harsh, sickly yellow hum of the prison lights. From the shadows of the weight pile, a man detached himself from a group of sycophants. This was Collins, a man whose authority was built on the broken teeth of those who dared to look him in the eye. He chewed on a toothpick, his gaze scanning the legendary cluster of scars over Lucas's heart. "I heard about the X-ray," Collins drawled, his voice carrying across the yard. 7 bullets. They say you're a ghost who forgot to die." He stepped into Lucas's path, flanked by 2 hulking shadows. "In here, ghosts don't run things. I do. And I don't like the way you breathe my air." Lucas didn't break his stride. He didn't even shift his gaze. He simply walked past Collins as if the man were nothing more than a flickering shadow on the wall. The disrespect was a physical blow. Collins's face contorted into a mask of purple rage. "Take him to the laundry," he hissed. "Let Raw show the boss what happens to kings without a crown." The laundry room was a humid, deafening labyrinth of steam and thumping industrial machines. Standing in the center was Raw, the prison's most feared enforcer, a mountain of a man whose neck was wider than most men's thighs. He held a heavy, damp towel like a garrote, his eyes small and vacant of anything but cruelty. As the heavy doors locked behind them, Raw moved with surprising speed, swinging a massive fist that whistled through the steam. Lucas moved with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for a man of his size. He didn't just dodge, he flowed. Every movement was a masterpiece of efficiency taught by Uncle Jay, minimum effort, maximum devastation. Raw roared, charging like a wounded bull. Lucas planted his feet, his breathing slowing until it was a rhythmic, oceanic pulse. As Raw lunged, Lucas stepped into the strike. His fist, hardened by years of striking stone, connected with Raw's solar plexus with a sound like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. The giant's eyes bulged, the air leaving his lungs in a single, agonizing wheeze. Lucas didn't stop. He delivered a swift, strategic strike to the temple, and the enforcer collapsed like a felled oak, the floorboards vibrating under the weight of his defeat. Lucas stood over the fallen giant, his chest barely rising. He looked at the guards watching through the reinforced glass, his intense gaze sending a clear, silent message. The king had arrived, and the bullets in his chest weren't the only things that were immovable. The sterile, humid heat of the prison laundry room faded into the sharp, biting chill of the Bavarian highlands. In this memory, the air didn't smell of bleach and sweat, but of pine needles and damp earth. Lucas was 19, his hands raw and weeping, standing before a monolithic slab of gray granite that seemed to grow out of the mountain itself. Behind him, Uncle Jay stood like a statue carved from the same stone, his voice a low, rhythmic tether to reality. "The bone is a living thing, Lucas," Uncle Jay murmured, his eyes reflecting the harsh alpine sun. "If you treat it like glass, it will shatter. But if you treat it like iron, it will forge." For months, the training had been a relentless cycle of destruction and rebirth. It began with bags of fine sand, then progressed to coarse gravel, and finally, to the unforgiving surface of the granite. Uncle Jay taught him the hardened bone technique, a method of microfracturing the knuckles through controlled impact, allowing the calcium to knit back together denser and stronger than before. It was a process of turning the body into a biological weapon, one agonizing strike at a time. Lucas remembered the night he had tried to quit. His hands were swollen into purple gloves, the pain radiating up his arms like liquid fire. Uncle Jay had sat him by the fire and held up his own hands, thick, gnarled, and textured like the bark of an ancient oak. "Your enemy will have steel, Lucas. They will have numbers. They will have the law," he had said, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "You have only what you carry within your skin. If your heart is immovable, your fist must be unstoppable." Under Jay's watchful eye, Lucas learned to breathe through the agony, to find the infinitesimal space between the impact and the scream. He learned that power didn't come from the shoulder or the hip, but from the earth itself, channeled through a mind that had embraced the necessity of violence. He struck the stone until his knuckles no longer bled, until the sound of the impact changed from a wet thud to a sharp, metallic crack. The flashback blurred as the mountain mist transitioned back into the rising steam of the prison laundry. Lucas looked down at his hands. They were steady, the skin over his knuckles thickened and pale, a contrast to the dark tan of his forearms. He could still feel the phantom chill of the mountain air and the weight of Uncle Jay's hand on his shoulder. The enforcer, Raw, lay unconscious at his feet, a testament to those years in the highlands. Lucas realized then that while the bullets in his chest reminded him of the world's betrayal, his hands were the tools Uncle Jay had given him to rebuild it. He turned away from the fallen giant, the way of the hardened bone, now etched into his very soul. The heavy silence of the prison's west section was more suffocating than the humidity of the laundry room. Malig, the mute boy who had taken to following Lucas like a silent shadow, was the only soul in this concrete hell who asked for nothing. He was a flicker of innocence in a place where light went to die. But in the eyes of Dia, the leader of the West section, innocence was just a resource to be exploited. The confrontation happened in the shadows of the loading docks. Dia, a man with cold, calculating eyes and a penchant for expensive silk shirts hidden under his prison blues, had cornered Malig. He wanted the boy to swallow a dozen packets of high-grade narcotics, a delivery for the outside. When Malig stood his ground, his silence a defiant wall, Dia didn't scream or shout. He simply drew a thin, jagged blade and ended the boy's life with a casual flick of his wrist. Lucas found him an hour later. The boy looked small, discarded like trash against the gray brick. Something snapped inside Lucas, a rage that didn't burn hot, but cold, like the mountain air of his youth. The 7 bullets in his chest seemed to hum with a phantom pain as he looked at Malig's lifeless eyes. The king wasn't just back, he was at war. He didn't go for Dia first. He went for Dia's power. Using the hardened bone technique, Lucas shattered the reinforced lock on the central storage unit where the prison's drug supply was hoarded. Inside, the air was thick with the chemical scent of thousands of dollars worth of filth. Lucas didn't steal it, he destroyed it. He ruptured the gas lines with his bare hands, the metal groaning under his unnatural strength, and struck a flint against the concrete. The explosion was a low, guttural roar that shook the very foundation of the west section. As the drug supply went up in a towering funeral pyre for Malig, Lucas stood in the center of the chaos, his muscled silhouette framed by the orange glow of the flames. Inmates and guards alike watched in terror as the man with 7 bullets near his heart walked calmly through the smoke. He wasn't just an inmate anymore. He was a storm, and the gang of 4 was finally standing in its path. The fire from the drug warehouse had barely cooled when the retaliation began. Lucas was ambushed in the dead of night, not by inmates, but by a tactical squad led by Sylvester, the assistant warden whose prosthetic hook glinted like a predator's tooth in the dim emergency lights. They didn't use fists. They used high-voltage prods that sent waves of agony through Lucas's nervous system, causing the 7 lead slugs in his chest to vibrate against his ribs. As he collapsed, Warden Crypson stepped into the light, his polished boots stopping inches from Lucas's face. "You wanted to be a martyr for a mute boy," Crypson hissed. "Now, you'll become a ghost." They dragged him to the deepest sub-basement of the European fortress, a place where the air was thick with the scent of wet lime and ancient rot. Here, the prison's foundation was exposed, a jagged trench of earth and cold stone. Sylvester threw Lucas into a steel-lined box barely larger than a coffin. A single, thin plastic pipe was the only concession to life, snaking upward to a hidden air pocket. As the lid was bolted shut, the sound of shovels began. Thud, thud, thud. The heavy, wet soil of the continent piled high, burying Lucas beneath tons of concrete and indifference. For the first 48 hours, the darkness was absolute. The pressure of the earth above groaned against the steel, a physical weight that tried to crush the air from his lungs. Most men would have succumbed to the screaming claustrophobia within hours, but Lucas was not most men. He closed his eyes and returned to the mountain. He slowed his heart rate until it was a ghost of a pulse, a rhythmic echo that bypassed the 7 bullets. He practiced the Hardened Bone breathing techniques Uncle Jay had taught him, shallow, meditative draws of air that recycled the oxygen in his blood. Days bled into one another. Above ground, a chilling silence settled over the yard. The rumor of the Mafia boss, who had been swallowed by the earth, spread through the cells like a virus. The inmates whispered his name in the shadows of the mess hall. They told stories of a man who didn't need to breathe, a king whose heart was made of lead and stone. To Crypson, Lucas was a dead man rotting in a hole. To the prisoners, he was becoming something far more dangerous, a myth. On the 7th night, the buried pipe carried the faint, distorted sound of the evening siren down into the depths. In the crushing blackness of his tomb, Lucas's eyes snapped open. His muscles, though starved of light, felt like coiled springs of tempered steel. He reached up, his thickened knuckles touching the cold lid of the steel box. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He simply began to strike, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of bone against metal signaling to the earth above that the grave was no longer deep enough to hold him. The evening of the warden's annual event was an exercise in grotesque opulence. In the grand hall of the administrative wing, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and roasted meats, a sharp contrast to the rot of the cells below. Crypson stood at the head of the table, flanked by his generals, Diamond, Dung, and Gled, celebrating the peace they had bought with blood. They believed the ghost was settled, buried deep under the weight of the foundation. They were wrong. The explosion didn't come from a bomb, but from the floor itself. The heavy oak planks splintered upward in a rain of jagged wood and dust as a hand, gnarled and white-knuckled, gripped the edge of the breach. Lucas rose from the dark earth like a vengeful god, his shirtless body caked in dried mud and lime, his 7-bullet heart beating with a ferocity that shook his entire frame. The music stopped. The wine glasses froze midair. Diamond, the swiftest of the generals, was the first to move, drawing a concealed ceramic blade. He lunged with the grace of a dancer, but Lucas was a mountain in motion. He caught Diamond's wrist midair, the sound of the hardened bone meeting bone echoing like a gunshot through the hall. With a sickening crunch, Lucas shattered the general's arm and delivered a palm strike to his chest that sent him flying through a floor-to-ceiling window. Dung roared, a massive man who relied on raw intimidation, charging with a heavy iron chair held aloft. Lucas didn't retreat. He stepped into the arc of the swing, taking the blow on his shoulder and using the momentum to drive a stiff-fingered strike into Dung's throat. The giant collapsed, clutching his neck. His reign over the north section ended in a single, silent gasp. Warden Crypson scrambled for his sidearm, screaming for the guards. But Sylvester's tactical team was trapped behind the reinforced doors Lucas had jammed from the outside. Seeing the tide turn, Gled, the youngest and most observant of the generals, dropped his weapon. He looked at Lucas, then at the cowardice of the warden, and realized he had been serving the wrong king. As Sylvester finally breached the door, raising a high-caliber rifle to end Lucas's life, Gled didn't hesitate. He threw himself into the line of fire, taking the burst of lead intended for the Mafia boss's back. As Gled fell, his eyes met Lucas's in a final, wordless acknowledgement of respect. Lucas didn't stop to mourn. He turned his intense, coal-black gaze toward the warden. The fall of the generals was complete, and the man with 7 bullets in his chest was now standing at the foot of the final throne. The smell of cordite and panic hung heavy in the air as Lucas kicked open the double doors of the warden's private office. Crypson was backed against the floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the central yard, his fingers trembling as he struggled to chamber a round into his gold-plated pistol. He looked at Lucas, mud-stained, blood-flecked, and radiating a cold, predatory calm, and saw a man who had transcended the laws of biology. Lucas didn't rush. He walked with the heavy, deliberate pace of a judge approaching the bench. With a movement too fast for the human eye to follow, Lucas's hand shot out, his hardened fingers crushing the slide of Crypson's pistol before the warden could pull the trigger. He seized the man by the throat, hoisting him off the ground until their eyes were level. "You called them filth," Lucas rasped, his voice vibrating with the resonance of the 7 lead slugs in his chest. "But you're the only rod in this house." He didn't end it there. Lucas hurled the warden through the shattered glass, sending him tumbling onto the balcony that loomed over the prison yard. Thousands of inmates, drawn out by the sound of the event's collapse, looked up. The spotlights swung around, pinning Crypson like a moth against the stone. In the blinding glare, the prisoners saw their oppressor reduced to a shivering heap, pleading for a life he had never shown mercy to. Lucas stepped into the light beside him, a shirtless silhouette of scarred muscle and iron will. He looked down at the sea of forgotten men and gave the only command that mattered. "Look at your God. He bleeds like any other." Lucas turned away from the broken man and descended into the yard. The guards stood frozen, their weapons lowered, paralyzed by the sight of the man who had returned from the grave. Lucas walked toward the monolithic outer wall, the reinforced barrier that separated the living hell from the European countryside. He planted his feet in the dirt, drawing a breath so deep it seemed to pull the very oxygen from the courtyard. He centered his spirit, channeling every ounce of Uncle Jay's training and every spark of Evelyn's memory into his right fist. The 7 bullets near his heart seemed to pulse in unison, a rhythmic engine of pure, unadulterated power. With a guttural roar, he unleashed a single, earth-shattering strike. The sound was not of bone hitting stone, but of a mountain fracturing. A web of cracks raced up the 50-foot wall before the entire section disintegrated into a cloud of dust and rubble. As the cool, night air of the highlands rushed in through the jagged breach, Lucas didn't look back at the chaos or the fallen warden. He stepped through the ruins, his silhouette fading into the dark forest beyond. The king was gone, but the wall was down, and for the first time in a decade, the silence of the prison was replaced by the sound of 1,000 men walking toward the light. So what do you guys think about this movie? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe for more awesome content. I'll see you guys in the next one.